So, William Shakespeare, playwright, actor, thespian. What do you say about these ridiculous allegations that you didn't even write your own plays?
I assume you're referring to Anonymous, is it?
Indeed, yes, that's right.
Yes. Well, I've been told about this. The film, obviously, being the natural progression from stage, I suppose. But I don't understand why. I mean, I've heard some stories of people saying that I wasn't educated. Is that right? Have you heard these stories as well?
I have indeed, yes.
You have? Well, I find this quite ridiculous. I mean, for a start, clearly, people don't know much about the time in which I lived. I mean, for a start, only the sons of gentlemen could be educated and therefore become playwrights in themselves. So, to be a playwright, one had to have been educated in the first place. My father was the High Bailiff. I mean, that's Mayor of Stratford in all but name. So, the fact that I wasn't raised as a gentleman surely is moot, isn't it? I would have thought.
Indeed. I mean, when did you write your plays? I mean,
all through. I mean, I started writing plays after I left Stratford. I had to run away from Stratford. I'd been caught poaching by Squire Thomas Lucy, who wasn't very pleased with me at the time, I have to say. I had to do a runner. My wife wasn't very pleased, and then I obviously moved away to London. I got a job with a passing acting troupe, being an educated man, and I didn't fancy a real job in Stratford, and obviously the authorities were looking for me, so I had to make myself scarce, and I went to London, and I discovered that I could write, so I started writing for the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and we originally tried to open a theatre in Blackfriars, but unfortunately James Burbage Senior, he hadn't obtained the permission to open the theatre, so we had to leave it empty, which is why we eventually moved to Southwark on the south side of the river. So that's obviously, and that's when we started doing plays from then on, up until my retirement in 1616.
So when in the day would you write your plays? Would it be at night or in the day or
well,
whenever?
It was a bit difficult really because obviously we were performing in the evenings mostly. Quite often I used to sit backstage. So generally I used to write my plays during the day. Obviously I used to write each part individually and give it out to the actors, so it's quite time consuming, so it did used to take me all day. I understand now you have it all printed out in one book, so it's a lot easier for scripts to be given out, but of course at the time I had to write each one individually, hand it out, and then in the evenings I would quite often wait backstage, which reminds me actually during a production of Richard III, Richard Burbage, who of course is James's son, I know what you're thinking, but he was a very good actor. And one time there was a young lady who had seen him in Richard III, and she sent a note backstage inviting him to dinner. I was standing in the wings, and I received a note inviting him to dinner, but I thought, well, why should Richard have all the fun? So I stole the costume for Richard, and I went round to the young lady's house. And I pretended that I was Richard Burbage. I did my finest impression of the man. And then, during the dinner, a servant came in with a note and gave me the note. And the note said that Richard III was downstairs. So, obviously, Richard Burbage had turned up for his dinner with the young lady. So I sent the note back down with another note scribbled on it saying that William the Conqueror came before Richard III. And yes, he never really forgave me for that one, I have to say. But no, we got on very well, I have to say. So I used to generally write my plays during the day, and then obviously we'd be performing and I'd be taking the Mickey out of Dickie in the evenings. So that's generally when we did them, yeah.
Fantastic. So why do people say it's people like De Vere or Francis Bacon? Where have they come up with these names from?
Oh, well, Marlowe is the other one,
yes,
of course.
Yes, good old
Marlowe,
kid.
Absolutely, fantastic man. Do you know, I did steal one or two things from Marlowe. I will put my hand up and admit this. Although, generally, most of them were party jokes. For instance, there's the old one, when I'm telling people about my school days, I always say that I had difficulty with a pencil. My father, on my first day of school, he gave me a pencil, and he tapped me on the back, and he said, remember to take great care And of course I went to school, but I was never very good with a pencil because I never knew whether to use 2B or not 2B.
No.
Oh yes, you see, that was one of Marlowe's.
Very
And
good.
unfortunately it always gets a groan. I don't understand why. Also similarly when I'm telling people that occasionally I was barred from my local pub. I seem to get, I know.
Very good.
I seem to get some groans, but you know, these ones I tell people I stole them from Marlowe.
So when people are sort of trying to come up with all these other names, is it
Yes.
just intellectual snobbery?
I think it might be. I mean, all I can say is I know what I wrote. And also the references in the plays. I mean, there are Ophelia's death in Hamlet. As a child, a cousin of mine died, Jane Shakespeare, distant cousin. She died while picking marigolds, and for years after that, I had an image of a young girl floating in a river surrounded by marigold flowers. And when I wrote Hamlet with Ophelia's death, I wanted my audiences to be haunted with the same image. And I hope they have been. I mean, certainly it was one of the things that put the willies up me, if you pardon the terrible pun.
No, dear.
But there's another story about the Clopton family. I mean, surely you know Romeo and Juliet.
Indeed.
Well, the final scene in Romeo and Juliet in the crypt was based upon a local girl called Charlotte Clopton, who died again when I was a child. I knew her. And she died and was taken to the tomb and buried. She died of the plague, also they thought. And then about a week later, her mother died of the plague and was taken to the very same crypt. They opened the crypt, and Charlotte Clopton was leaning up against the door of the tomb with a portion of her arm missing, where she'd been in there for a week, buried alive. And that was another recurring nightmare of mine. I mean, obviously you can see why I was terrified of crypts and things and the inspiration for Romeo and Juliet, but of course, Alas, Poor Yorick, with the grave diggers, that was one of my great fears, was of having my bones dug up and played with. And so, you know, with that, the references from my life and in the plays, there are too many of them. And the fact that I was a great fan of history. I enjoyed reading about the ancient Greeks, Plutarch's stories of ancient Rome I used to read. And so all the references to the Greeks and the Romans in my plays, and then with, of course, Henry V. I used to enjoy reading about him as a child. Holinshed's Chronicles I read as a teenager. Obviously it was his second edition, 10 years later,
Sure.
after the first one. Which I used for writing my history plays. But yeah, so as you can see, my interest as a child are all in my plays. So, and of course the iambic pentameter, which I absolutely love. A lot of people ask me why I love that. And I have no idea why, to be fair. I think I just like the rhythm. I always like a good rhythm in my plays.
Indeed. So all in all, it's much ado about nothing, really.
Much ado about nothing, absolutely. Well done.
I thank you. Well, thanks.
I was worthy of Marlowe.
Oh, well, hopefully I won't have the same end.
No, certainly not.
Well, thank you for your time, Will.
Not at all. You're perfectly welcome.
Oh, thank you. So listen, I mean, okay, thanks for the interview, Will. That's absolutely brilliant. But listen, off the record, mate, what's the deal? Why are they trying to get you?
For what? If you mean for...
Well, trying to destroy your reputation.
Well, when anybody has a good reputation, you always find there are people trying to pull you down. Emotional vampires, I call them. I've had them my whole life. I mean, at school, there are always people. If you have the best toy or the best clothes, there's always somebody who's trying to destroy your clothes or rip the clothes or whatever. And I think it's always the same. I mean, my plays, they weren't just my plays that were successful. I mean, there were plenty of other playwrights who had successful plays, but obviously mine are some of the only ones that have survived. And obviously because of that, there isn't much sort of competition for me these days. So I think people are always trying to come up, and everybody likes a conspiracy theory.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, anything like that, espionage, spies, conspiracies, everybody loves it. And certainly, as I'm not really around much to defend myself, I find I'm quite an easy target, I suppose.
Because it came out of America, didn't it? Late 1800s, some lady decided suddenly she was going to...
So I understand, so I heard. I mean, who'd have thought it with, when we first went over to the New World with Virginia, that suddenly they would be... disputing this years and years later.
That's right.
But,
she did end up in a madhouse, from what I gather. So.
Did she?
Apparently so.
Well, that's quite right.
It's quite right, too.
Who knows? But certainly, I think there's just people trying to stir up trouble, I think, really. I don't see why anyone. But then, to be fair, a film is a film. If people want to, just like a play, if people want to go and watch a play or a film and be entertained for an afternoon, fine. I mean, I wrote things in my plays that weren't necessarily true. So, yeah, but if it's entertaining and people enjoy it, well, then as a playwright or as a film writer, you've done your job. So.
But it's not just the film, is it? I mean, there's been intellectuals and there's other actors joining in as well. I mean, what's the deal with that?
Oh, well, actors. Talk to me about actors. Will Kemp was always one. He had enormous ego. I believe you said some rather famous actors. You mentioned some to me earlier on. I forget their names. But yes, certainly Will Kemp was always one. He always used to improvise and go off script, and some of the things he used to say, I actually wrote him out. He played Falstaff, and I wrote him out of Henry V because he always used to improvise and go off the script. But I was the writer, and I thought, well, if you annoy me, I'll write you out. So I did, and Falstaff dies off stage. That one, that showed him. And then he danced a jig all the way from London to Norwich in 9 days and wrote a rather florid pamphlet about it. So you always find that the actors are, trying to stir up trouble one way or the other.
And probably fair to say that your work will long outlast them, really.
I seem to have lasted this long. So it remains to be seen, but I don't see why not. And as long as people remain interested in seeing my plays, well, then I'm delighted.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thanks again, Will.
No, not at all.